So we'll be doing this chant on page 30, and some of you maybe will just listen. Others who would like to can chant along. And it's really this powerful teaching that these wholesome emotions, you could think of the divine abodes, these four emotions of love, as the qualities of an awakened one. So if we wonder what a Buddha or wise mature, spiritually mature person, what goes on in their mind. I think somebody actually asked Deepamad, one of the really wise teachers in our lineage, like, what's going on in your heart and mind? And I think her answer was something like samadhi, the stability of mind, emptiness, meaning the heart, the mind was empty of grasping, empty of ill will, and metta, loving kindness. And so it's like for those of us who aren't fully awakened, it can be useful just to intuit, like, what is this mind? What would this mind be like when it's not entangled with greed, anger, and delusion? As a way of touching into more natural kindness, more pervasive. And there's this Pali word apamana, which means boundless or immeasurable, meaning the kind of friendliness or good-heartedness isn't bound up, isn't restricted or limited by our fear, by our need for revenge, getting even. So these are qualities that we do approach normally just in the course of a day, a week, where we'll have a heart, a mind that is, relatively speaking, not restricted, not limited by fear or aversion or any unhealthy fixed view about this or that. And our job as someone interested in these teachings from early Buddhism is to really get familiar with that quality of boundlessness, the mind, this ordinary mind, but this ordinary mind not restricted, not bound by our fear, bound up with our fear, with our fixed views. And to really start to recognize that as a kind of love that will have different flavors because it will be showing up in a particular context, this moment. Sometimes it will have the flavor of compassion, tenderheartedness. Sometimes it will have the flavor of appreciative joy or gladness. Sometimes it will have the basic flavor of friendliness, open-heartedness, that generous quality of the heart, and sometimes equanimity, equanimous, this beautiful, radiant balance. So this chant on page 30 that we're going to do now, it's really the Buddhist teachings on accessing these boundless qualities, these boundless emotional, attitudinal qualities that are, in a way, our birthright. They are within our capacity, and we can certainly move from states that are relatively bound up and fixed and heavy, right? We know those, to states that are relatively unfixed, not so bound, more free, more radiantly wholesome and good. So let's do the chant, and then we'll sit together. So we're on page 30. Now let us make the four boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with gladness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with equanimity, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. And take a moment, adjust the body if you need to, understanding that it really helps as best we can to hold the body relatively still, to have it relatively upright and comfortable. So just do the best you can with the body now. So we'll be somewhat stable for the next 30-35 minutes. And we're going to explore in the meditation this morning this quality of boundlessness. But we can begin in a very earthy, very real way by simply connecting or dropping in now to the experience of the body here, sitting, breathing body. And we're practicing not needing the body, the bodily sensations to be different than they are. So the sense of boundlessness comes simply by realizing that we can allow the body and allow the quality of our heart right now, whatever we're feeling, that we can allow things to be the way they are. So we're not imposing or projecting a problem with the way the body is. And we're demonstrating that there's not a problem by our willingness to be intimate and to feel and to open and to allow the body to be the way it is, this unrestricted acceptance of the body, of sensation, and more subtly the feeling, the quality of our heart, whatever the heart's feeling, whatever the qualities that might be there now in the heart, moving through the heart. Emotional qualities, for example. And we're experimenting with this understanding and this way of relating that everything belongs, that the totality of our experiencing of the body, of the heart, that everything belongs. No need for defense, no need to control. And we're not trying to make any blanket statement about the nature of the world. We're just saying right now, opening to the body, opening to the energetic and emotional qualities in the heart, that right now it seems safe to relax and to allow and to feel what's here moving, what's here available to be felt. That right now we don't need to practice any kind of resistance. We don't need to imagine that somebody has to be in control or fix, make things different. And there's a very particular, it's subtle, but a very particular freedom in that allowing, in that openness. It has both the flavor of freedom and the flavor of love, this willingness to include, this willingness to acknowledge that this is how it is. Whatever's moving right now in the body, whatever's moving as feeling in our heart, this sense of being able to include, not having to restrict, not having to judge. Everything belongs right here and now. So this is the beginning of that boundless quality the Buddha points to. Appamana is the Pali word. This boundlessness of accepting things as they are, allowing the conditions of the body, allowing the conditions of our heart, allowing everything to move, to keep moving, keep changing. In a way, we're learning that our hearts, our sensitive heart, can be this very wise and loving conduit that allows everything to move on through. It's a way of including, aligning with conditions as they are. It's our way of being intimate and real, and really creating the context for a skillful response, or a skillful responding to life, skillful engagement. It's not so much about figuring out who I should be, how I should act, what I should say. It's really about learning how to let that response arise naturally from this very profound exposure and opening and allowing the heart to be touched. So we're going to continue now in silence, trusting this relaxation, this opening, starting with the body, feeling the heart, the sensitive heart, and just exploring. See if it's safe to let everything move, to allow sensations of the body to move, to allow emotions and thoughts and other mental activities to move. And to see that this allowing is both an expression of wisdom and love, both the expression of being intimate, being close, and really supporting a skillful engagement with life. So we'll continue now in silence for the rest of the set. So, with this particular meditation, we're learning to recognize this capacity to allow the sensations of the body to move, and the capacity to allow feeling, emotion to move, mental activity to move. So, in this sense, the meditation object is the allowing itself, the opening, the trusting, and to notice the boundless quality of acceptance. So even if there is some subtle fear or resistance, well, that can be accepted too. So abiding in this openness and this boundlessness, there really isn't any phenomena, any experience that has to be a problem. Oh, it's like this. Now this is arising. This resistance is arising. This doubt is arising. This too belongs, allowing this to be what it is. And so, with this meditation object, we're keeping in mind that sense of space, that sense of love that includes, that understands, that isn't bothering to have a problem with whatever's coming and going. And in this way, we're really attuned to the truth of change, the truth of impermanence, the flow or movement of sensation, of thought, of emotion, of everything. So we'll sit for another 5 minutes or so. And take a little time, adjust your bodies. Nice to be with everybody this morning, and appreciate people saying hello in the chat. It's a way of just helping us sense the community we're part of here. And most of you know, Shannon Gibney and Nancy Bowler and Omkar are helping us have small group gatherings right after this program. And so Nancy will help you if you're interested. Just stay on the live stream when we end at 11:45 Central Time. And Nancy will help you transition to the Zoom room where she'll divide you up in small groups for 15 to 20-minute conversation with a few other community members about how you're practicing these days, or certain themes maybe from the talk that resonated with your own experience as a human being that you want to unpack with a small group of other community members. So you're always welcome to join in to those small groups. Shelley Graff on Wednesday night has been having small groups before the Wednesday evening program, and this is a time also to connect with a smaller group of community members. So as those of you who've been part of the conversation and the teachings these last number of weeks, we've been looking at the Buddhist teachings on impermanence, the ungovernable, unreliable, ephemeral nature of all experience, internal, external. And because, the mind is quite oriented towards thinking and concepts, that's a very potent filter. And when we have a concept, oh yeah, this is Common Ground Sunday morning group, concepts have the appearance of solidity and permanence in a way that a more direct experiencing of the moment doesn't. So we're actually, mostly in our lives, we're confused by the concepts our thinking mind generates. And of course, that we share together in our social sphere of interacting, communicating with each other. Of course, we're always, or almost always, that interaction with other people is through language and through concept, which, like I said, concepts have the appearance of solidity and permanence. They're diluting, we say. There's nothing inherently wrong with a thought or a concept, an idea. The problem comes when our mind mistakenly thinks the thought is more than what it is. So whatever this is for each of us right now, this showing up together on live stream, reflecting on the teachings of the Buddha together, whatever it is, the concept, whatever that phrase or that idea is, oh, I'm at the Common Ground Sunday morning program, that's just a pointer to something that's quite alive with change, quite ephemeral, quite dynamic. It isn't a thing or a noun as much as a natural happening, process, unfolding, right? But we use a concept so we don't actually have to show up into the immediacy of what we're feeling and how those feelings are changing, and what we're seeing and what we're thinking, and how all of those sense experiences are really totally characterized by change, the ongoing change, ongoing flow, ongoing motion of thought, emotion, sight, sound. So the last few weeks in particular, I've been using or sharing the Buddhist teachings on how that perception, keeping in mind the truth of change, which is just what's already here naturally when our mind isn't superficially fixated on thought and concept, then we'll notice the flow of the moment, the dynamic changing nature of the moment, and how that perception of change can really facilitate the heart opening to freedom, to a more and more released way of being, as opposed to a fixated, tight way of being. And so one way the Buddha taught, one of the major ways the Buddha taught is, hey, stabilize your present moment awareness so you can see things more clearly. When you start to see things more clearly the way they actually are, keep in mind the changing nature, because by keeping in mind the changing nature, you will naturally tease out the mind's habit to cling, to grasp, to get attached, to identify. And in teasing out those deep habits of attachment, you will gradually experience more and more space, the space of freedom, the space of love, the deeper space of release, the heart that is empty of selfing, of self-centered drama, the heart that's empty of grasping with greed, grasping with hate, grasping with denial or distraction. So I'm going to shift today from, very related to what we've been talking about, how to use the opening to impermanence to facilitate the heart dropping, abandoning its habits of clinging. You and I, we don't personally let go of clinging or grasping, right? Because that would be so easy. We just hear the teaching from the Buddha, yeah. Real supreme freedom arises through the cessation of grasping. And we go, okay, and we just let go of grasping and we'd be an awakened one. But obviously it doesn't happen like that. But there is a natural process when the supporting causes are there, then the letting go of attachment, the letting go of clinging, selfing, that happens as a natural process. And what the Buddha discovered in his own heart and in his own experience is that really attuning to the reality of change, the perception of change, really highlighting that truth that everything is in motion. Experience is really experiencing. It's what's a natural unfolding, a movement of experiencing, right? And keeping that in mind as we live our life, as we do our meditation, it wears out any habits of fixing with attachment, fixing with identification, with selfing or self-centered dramas. They just don't work when we're aligning or attuning to the reality of change. Now, today I want to sort of expand that into a slightly different area where how we use the understanding of change, of anicca, impermanence, to really support the development of love, of metta, and the four flavors of love, right? We have that basic goodness, basic friendliness, the word metta. We have karuna, which is that tender-hearted, compassionate relationship to suffering. Oh, may you be free of the suffering. If there's something I can do, may I do it. If there's nothing I can do, I abide with this wish. May you find a way for the suffering to be alleviated in your life. Because as you know, there isn't always something we can do to alleviate the suffering of others. But it doesn't get in the way of compassion. Compassion is really this liberated state of mind. If there's something I can do that would be appropriate for me to do to alleviate your suffering, I'm going to do that. If there's nothing I can do, there's nothing I can do in this moment. But I can abide in this dynamic, open sensing of your suffering and sensing the wish, may you be free from the suffering. It's a really beautiful emotional state, even though it is that proximity to suffering that brings compassion to the fore. So we have basic friendliness, we have compassion, we have appreciative joy or gladness, sympathetic joy, where we're just appreciating what's beautiful, appreciating the happiness of others, even if it's just simple happiness. Someone got a new pair of shoes and they're happy. Oh, may your happiness continue. I understand how ephemeral that happiness is, but I can still appreciate it. As long as this happiness is alive in your heart, it's a cause for my own joy, like appreciating that simple, ordinary happiness of getting what you wanted. Right? So even something that simple can be appreciated. And there's so much. We can appreciate the greenness of the leaves in the summer. We can appreciate the color and the falling of the leaves in the fall, and the bareness of the trees in the winter, and the buds in the spring. There really isn't any moment that doesn't have the possibility of mudita, the capacity of our heart to appreciate how alive, how much intelligence is just part of this interdependent thing we call life or reality. And then the last of the four qualities, equanimity, this beautiful, enlivened state of balance. And it's often, all of these beautiful qualities of the heart can be misunderstood. And in the later commentarial tradition, there this teaching on the near enemies of these four qualities of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. So attachment is the near enemy of basic friendliness. Like, I'm friendly, but I'm attached. I have an agenda. And if I don't get what I want, or if it isn't the way I want it to be, then I'm going to take my love back. I'm going to take my friendliness back. And with compassion, the near enemy is a kind of pity. Like, I don't really want you to be suffering. And it slips into, not only do I wish for you to be free from suffering, your suffering's kind of bothering me. It's sort of scaring me. And my compassionate action, my compassionate wishes for you, are more about me dealing with being irritated by your suffering than really that heartfelt wish, may you be free from suffering, really caring about you. So sometimes we call that pity, where it's like, ooh, I don't want to be contaminated by your suffering. So my wish that you may be free from suffering is really about protecting some sense of a me who feels a little bit vulnerable because of your suffering. Obviously, that's not compassion, that's fear, masquerading as compassion. And even mudita, this appreciative joy, there's what's called a near enemy, right? Where the lightness of that joy of appreciation, we kind of get intoxicated with the exuberance and the joy itself. And we're sort of not really appreciating that person's happiness and wishing that that happiness continue. We're kind of lost in our own exuberance, our own sort of contact high from somebody else's success or somebody else's happiness. And we've lost the intimacy and the connection. We're not in the moment. And that's the thing about all the near enemies. You can recognize them in your own heart when you're noticing that sense of disconnection instead of that sense towards boundless opening, boundless, unrestricted. And the boundless, the opening is really characterized by non-fear, non-protection. And so for equanimity, the near enemy would be a kind of indifference. So that beautiful balance, what makes it so beautiful, that cool, unshakable, intimate balance, is the intimacy. Like, it's, easy to have equanimity when we're disconnected. I could have a lot of equanimity about some problem on the other side of the planet, where people are really suffering. But oh yeah, causes and conditions, things happen this way sometimes. I care about you, but I'm not really connected with the causes and conditions that are causing your suffering, so I care, but I know I'm not in charge. And it's like, oh, that's easy when we're on the other side of the planet and we don't know any of those people. But what is equanimity when we're really connected? So true equanimity really depends on whether we're using our imagination or we have the direct experience right in front of us. But we're really peeling away any distance, any armor, any defensiveness. And we see the complexity, we see the ambiguity, we see the messiness, the entrenchment, like maybe the social political situation we're in here in our country. around all the injustice or economic injustice and racial injustice and just injustice around, you know, different ways that we differentiate each other around gender, class, and all these ways, and how entrenched, how deeply these problems are embedded in our institutions and in how our hearts and minds are conditioned. And we can see that, and we feel like the appropriate thing is to distance ourselves. Oh, yeah, the world's a mess. The causes and conditions for racism are deep, for classism, sexism are quite deep. I care, but it ain't my problem, right? Because I didn't set it in motion. And that's that indifference. It can look like equanimity because the heart can have a superficial kind of balance and evenness. But it's really because of the idea that, I'm apart from the messiness and the injustice and the craziness that is moving in our community, that somehow we stand apart. We're separate. I care about it, but, and I really hope you all figure it out, but it's not my problem. And so we have to get to almost get a sense, learn how to detect these near enemies when our heart is separating instead of our heart moving apamana, that movement towards boundless, that unrestricted. And instead of getting confused by the idea of boundlessness as sort of really being out there somewhere, it's really more about the absence of defense, the absence of separation. We're uh, realizing it's really an awakening. We're realizing that the heart doesn't need a fixated stance, doesn't need to be fixated, located anywhere. And that's really like when we run into somebody who's got a lot of natural, trustworthy love. One of the things we sense in that interaction with somebody who's in a really alive and real place of loving is they're not, it's not about where they're located. It's not about them. The generosity of someone's heart in that moment and how they're showing up, what they're saying, how they're acting, it isn't defending somebody or somebody getting something they need. It's not that that stuff is even bad, but we want to discover this way of being where really unpack that experience of the freedom of loving unconditionally, maybe we could call it. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, like this, how impermanence, seeing the changing nature, can really support that trusting of the boundless, unconditional love, so to speak. And in a way, as we have found, when we when we're confronted with the truth of impermanence, however that might show up, like something goes away that we didn't expect to go away, something happens that we didn't expect to happen, and we can feel a little shocked and frozen, betrayed by the sudden arising of impermanence. Impermanence doing what impermanence does. Things come and go. And they're coming and going due to innumerable causes and conditions which we don't see and don't clearly understand, right? They have their own wisdom, their own nature. I took a course with Venerable Analayo this last week on emptiness and the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes that we're talking about today. And I'm not sure if this is his original statement or he was quoting somebody, but he says, the void of emptiness is full to the brim of causes and conditions. So this really teaches us, like, we want to open our heart to the nth degree, opening without fixation, without the mind being tight with fear, tight with greed, tight with hate, tied with any ideas of separation, right? So that's opening to the void of emptiness, empty of any fixations. So we're opening, and what do we find in that void? As he says, full to the brim with causes and conditions. This is the very dynamic activity of life, of emotion, of power plays, of love, of beauty, of the messiness of our world, the messiness of our hearts and minds, the messiness of our body. When I say messiness, I'm not in any way implying that it's bad, but messy in the sense of not being in control. A beautiful expression of everything that's in motion, this interdependent activity we call life, this sort of full to the brim of causes and conditions. So when we open to Dhamma the way it is, and we see that this moment is full to the brim of causes and conditions, we basically, just to keep it simple, have two reactions. One is to get anxious because we sense that the sense of me can no way be in control of everything that's moving. And we freeze up and we can activate kind of more aversive control techniques. It can activate wanting to give up. It can activate distraction and denial, right? All of which are just more and more ways to fixate a sense of a me in a world that is totally and completely fluid without any fixed point. So you see that really is the birthplace of existential anxiety, the deep, almost never-ending uneasy feeling in our heart because we're trying to be a somebody in a very open, fluid, non-fixed world. It will never work. And this is really goes to the heart of dukkha, what we mean by how this is unsatisfactory. Because it's not that nature is somehow off or the world is somehow off, but the conditioned habit to want to find safety from an egoic point of view, that's what's off. Ain't going to happen. Will be eternally frustrating. And the Buddha describes this in really heartbreaking terms, like how long have human beings been seeking solid ground in a way you're never going to find it. We're never going to find it. Long enough, we've cried more tears than would more than fill the four oceans. That's a lot of tears, right? So he used these sort of graphic images to sort of point out how that doesn't work. But there's another way to use impermanence, which in a way is this tenderizing process. And it takes some real skill, like how to use the wildness, the change, the impermanence, the ephemeral nature, the lack of control that we have in our lives, the exposure to both the beauty, but especially to the difficulty in life, the injustice in life, right? How can we use it not to trigger the reaction of greed, hate, and delusion, denial, but how can we use impermanence, the ephemeral nature, to tenderize the heart in a way that wears out all habits of separation, all habits of clinging and grasping. And this, I think, really works well, like as a beginning training point for us to use whenever we bump into change, whenever we bump into something happening that we didn't expect. Could be something good happening too, not just the bad stuff that happens, but sudden things that show up. Oh, I didn't expect that. To really let it tenderize our heart, like, because the response is either to, oh, I'm not in control, or we could say, oh, like almost like a sense of awe. There's something happening here. I'm not in control over it. What's the appropriate response? Well, maybe a sense of awe and trust. Because what life teaches us more than anything is mistrusting life doesn't help. Freezing up, reacting with denial, reacting with some attempt to be in charge, be in control. More than anything, life teaches us that doesn't work. So trusting is very close to this willingness to care, this willingness to have our heart open and generous. Like, I don't know much, but I know it is this way right now. And I can either imagine there's a way for me to say no to the way that it is right now. Already, it is already this way right now. I can either practice saying no, which is really, when we look at it clearly, absurd. How would it make sense to say no to the way it already is? So just bring to mind something that's difficult in your life or in the world. It can make so much sense to want to say no, because this thing we're thinking about maybe is a cause for real harm. People are really suffering. But to say no is to separate ourselves from reality. It is the way that it is right now. So why not practice saying, yes, it is this way, but it breaks our heart. So this is the thing. It's like, maybe that's okay. Maybe the heart is designed to break open, to wear down any kind of hardness. Now, like I said earlier, this is a delicate operation, right? We're in this dynamic where we're using the wildness of change, not being in control, life happening due to causes and conditions, the immediacy of our relationships, and the wider world. We're using that skillfully, not too much, not too little, to wear down the habit of separating ourselves with greed, like, oh, I'll get this, I'll get a big car, I'll have a gated community I'll live in, I'll have a great security system, I'll hang out with only people I like. We have all these ways of using greed, using hate, using denial and delusion to fixate some kind of safety, that it only increases the sense of exposure and vulnerability. It only amplifies that existential anxiety. On the surface, it may, for a while, seem like it's working, but the monster is lurking, the monster of reality, because we've turned reality, the change, impermanence, we've turned it into a monster because it's hunting us. Whatever certainty we think we have, even the certainty of our ideas, they're not what they appear to be. They're not solid ground. So this very nimble work of using the reality of impermanence to break our heart wide open, to tenderize our heart, to bring our heart more and more into the stream, the unconditioned movement of causes and conditions, for lack of a better way of talking about it. The motion of the body, the motion of emotion, the motion of feeling, the emotion of thought, the dance of our social world. Precisely because it is messy, it can't be controlled, that it's full of beauty and full of horrible injustice, right? It breaks our heart wide open. And here's the really powerful thing to realize, is that in that process of using impermanence to wear down habits that don't work and to crack open the heart, tenderize the heart so it's more and more open, it's that openness, that vulnerability, that exposure, that capacity to see and feel and be in the middle of all this activity of life that supports a more skillful engagement, a more creative and beautiful and fearless engagement. What we say, what we do, what we don't do, how we act. And you know how it is. I mean, we see this better, of course, in other people, but when people are engaging a problem, whether it's just in their own heart or in their family or in the wider world, when we see people engaging problems from a place of fear, a place of greed, a place of some kind of fixed idea, even an idea we may agree with, but the fixedness always undermines the engagement, always gets in the way ultimately. So what we want is there's no way to live a life without being engaged. Sitting on a couch, avoiding life could be somebody's way of engaging life, not a necessarily very effective one. but it's just as much an engagement as somebody, you know, running for president or getting on the streets or deciding to raise children or deciding not to raise children or whatever it might be that somebody sort of sees as their path into life. So we're always going to have an engaged life. It's just a question if that engagement is flowing from a fixed place that the heart is imagining is right or me, or that engagement is really coming from a more open, unfixed place. And like I mentioned in the guided meditation, we're learning to trust that boundless, that unfixed quality. And I really encourage you, just in ordinary moments of your day, as much of the day, not just your formal sitting time, just see if you can relax into a more unbounded state. Like, I'll give you an example right now. This may be a nice entry for this. So, you know, a lot of us were trained with loving kindness practice to bring somebody to mind. For me, you know, maybe I bring holding my cat against my chest, feeling the warmth of my cat's body, feeling the weight, feeling the contact. So it's a very earthy, real memory for me. You know, I can really viscerally bring that to mind. And just the sense of the cat appreciating being held and me appreciating, and just that kind of reverberation of like, we're having a moment together that we're both in our own way appreciating. And it's entirely, from my perspective, it feels entirely wholesome. I don't sense any greed, hate, any aversion, delusion, denial. I don't see any fixedness in that. I'm not attached to it lasting, right? I've learned, you know, it doesn't work to get attached. It will last as long as it lasts, and then the cat gets restless, and I let go, and the cat does his thing, and I do my thing. But for those seconds when it's not, so I can bring that memory to mind. I have that real visceral memory, but that memory is like a wormhole to the quality of love. And then I'll bring the, you know, as I remember that experience, I'll notice in particular the boundless, like that's always here and now, that absence of greed, hate, and delusion that memory of holding my cat represents, right? So the memory is a wormhole to that experiencing the heart not fixed with greed, not fixed with hate or aversion or fear, not fixed with denial or distraction, i.e., a heart that's open, generously open. And to really sense that wish for ease, that wish for peace, that wish for well being for all beings, for all things. Now, once we have a way to remember, basically, we're remembering that this heart, this mind, has that capacity to be loving in a very beautiful, real way, then we learn to trust it and to abide and to take it on the road. That's the most important thing. Like to find it in all kinds of ordinary moments, like right now. I mean, this is as good of a moment as any to realize that this heart right now doesn't require any sort of fixed location. It can actually be abiding in a more open, generous, kindly, tender-hearted, appreciative, balanced way. Right? And then if there's something that appears right now for you to be in the way, then just bring that generous quality to whatever appears to be in the way of boundlessness right now, like open space. But open space that really has, initially, it's really important to sense the pleasantness of that love, the healing quality of that love, that inclusive, non-fragmenting, not dividing things up in terms of me and you or good and bad, but a more inclusive, more generously inclusive quality. And of course, if we don't practice that, we're not going to get good at it. So we really have to like be interested. This is the start. Be interested in those ordinary moments, like the example I gave of holding my cat for a few seconds when he's enjoying it and I'm enjoying it, and there's no greed, anger, and delusion, apparently, in my heart at least, and just really appreciating that boundless, simple, boundless freedom for a few seconds, because it reminds me of what the heart is capable of. So why not now? Trusting that boundless. And for me, a lot of times when I trust boundlessness, what comes to the surface are all the ancient wounds, all the healed places of pain, trauma, grief. But the key for us is to not be confused. I mean, why would we expect that we would have no wounds? No unfinished business. Of course we have unfinished business. We're human. and and it doesn't, I'm not implying that I know all my unfinished business. I just feel what I feel in any given moment. And it's really useful not to be surprised. So, because we can be idealistic about the word boundless love. That's why that tender-heartedness, or one image we're trying to evoke in an altar we're putting together at Common Ground's retreat property. People like Sue Cochran, some of you know Sue, a long-time leader from Common Ground, who's really working hard to deal with her many bouts of cancer, stage 4 cancer. She's been working with for over 10 years now, I think. But she really turned us on to this Japanese art form where they take broken pottery and they put a beautiful golden seam, and as they put it back together, I can't remember how to pronounce the Japanese term for that art form, so I'm not going to massacre it by trying. But some of you know that. But anyway, she's written about that just in terms of her Dharma work with her cancer, her many rounds of cancer and treatments over many years. And really finding something very beautiful, very liberating, coming in the messy, messy work of doing what we can with cancer, or doing what we can with racism in this country, or doing what we can with economic injustice, right? We don't want to be confused by how entrenched and messy to think that something beautiful can't come out of this. There's something beautiful even before we figure out how to heal the deep, deep roots of racism. There's something very beautiful and healing about waking up to it and doing the work and doing the next thing. Even before the deep reverberations of racism get taken care of, there's something about showing up to it. And this is true with all the work that's asking. So this is the last point I want to make as we get curious about boundlessness, all the expanded states that come with developing our practice. Because that term, empty of self, right, which is really the crowning jewel of the awakening process, that's just that boundless opening, that boundless participating with life to the nth degree, where we're moving the last fixation, this deep habit of locating a self. So all that's left is unrestricted participation. And I think a good word for that unrestricted participation is love. It's real love. It isn't love with attachment. It isn't love with fear or love with indifference, or love where the mind is sort of captivated by the joy and the freedom. It's really a functional way to be a human being. It's what's for me, so trustworthy about the Buddhist teachings is how pragmatic. It really talks about freedom to the nth degree, but the result of kind of engaging the practices, for me at least, is something that's so real and trustworthy in terms of dealing with my own body, my own relationships, and the world that I inhabit. So I'll leave it here. Obviously, a lot's coming up in the next few days, and it's a really great place for practice. And I just encourage all of us, this capacity to show up with a stability of present moment awareness, of kindness and curiosity, and not feeling the need. Now we're going to slide into fixed state, self-righteousness or whatever. But we want to really practice. Maybe I don't need a fixed state to navigate these next few days, few weeks, few months, few decades, right? And it's actually kind of naive to think that somehow the craziness in our world and the injustice is something that can disappear in a day or a week or a month. And it's, I think, more useful to think we're in it for the long haul. And so what kind of way of participating really allows us to be in it for the long haul? So please check the Common Ground calendar. We have a lot of special events coming up just to help us navigate these times. I know Shelley Graff and Patrice Kelch are doing something Tuesday evening. And probably Thursday afternoon, there will be a post-election pause that Win Fricke and I will lead, just to sort of ground in what's all in motion at that time. There is a program beginning on Thursday night in collaboration with Clouds and Water Zen Center, Common Ground teachers and leaders, and some of the Clouds and Water teachers and leaders are going to be leading a 7-month training or practice using Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, and really looking at the connection between Dharma practice and addressing our racialized trauma, some of those deep wounds that I just mentioned. And Thursday night on the 5th is an introductory session, so you can get a deeper sense of what it's all about. So check that out. And we have a guest teacher next Tuesday night, the 10th, not this week, but a week from Tuesday. Jason Soul, former president of the Minneapolis NAACP and a professor at Hamline University, and really a spiritual practitioner in his own way, really looking at how to engage the sticky, messy work of racial justice and criminal, just the injustice of our criminal justice system, and how to lean in and do that work as spiritual practice. So join Jason on Tuesday evening, the 10th, if you're free. And as I mentioned, a lot of other things coming up, including a 2-day retreat that Shelley and I will lead on Friday and Saturday. Still some spots for that if you want to join in. And this afternoon, Patrice and Kyoko Katayama will be leading the annual Day of Remembrance. So anybody's welcome at 2 o'clock, but especially if you've lost somebody the last several years and you just want a more conscious time to bring that person and any grief to mind in community. It's really a beautiful session. Of course, that will be online. All the links will be on our online calendar. And thank you to Nancy. I see that she already put the link. Those of you who'd like to join the Zoom group can just go ahead to the Zoom meeting now. You'll see the link that Nancy put up in the chat a while back. Go there and have a nice discussion. Otherwise, I'll hope to see most of you next Sunday. Have a good week and good luck to everyone.